Your history textbook is one of the greatest lies ever told. While you learned about Rome's 7 hills, they never mentioned the 300 cities of Kush that traded with China. While they taught you about Greek democracy, they erased the fact that Africans were governing complex federations when Europeans lived in mud huts. This isn't accident. This is architecture. The deliberate construction of amnesia. You're about to discover how Western historians didn't just ignore African civilizations, they actively rewrote them out of existence. And once you see their methods, you never read history the same way again. In 1847, a German archaeologist named Carl Richard Lepsius stood before the pyramids of Meroe in Sudan. 300 royal tombs stretched before him, monuments that had stood for over 2,000 years. What did this pioneer of Egyptology call them? Crude imitations. Not ancient marvels. Not sophisticated engineering. Crude imitations. This wasn't scholarship. This was the birth of historical erasure. But here's what Lepsius refused to document: the Kingdom of Kush ruled Egypt for 90 years. The Kushite pharaohs weren't invaders, they were restorers who saved Egyptian civilization when it had collapsed. Pharaoh Taharqa, a Kushite king, built more pyramids than any pharaoh in Egyptian history. Yet your textbooks call this the dark period of Egypt. Dark because Africans were in charge. The pattern was set. When Europeans encountered African greatness, they had 3 strategies: deny it existed, claim someone else built it, or call it primitive. Every single strategy was deployed against Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe, a stone city that covered 1,800 acres, with walls 30 feet high built without mortar. When European colonizers found it in the 1870s, they couldn't deny it existed. It was right there. So they chose strategy 2, someone else built it. They claimed it was built by Arabs, by Portuguese, by anyone except the Shona people who actually built it. The British archaeologist Theodore Bent spent months there in 1891. His mission wasn't to discover truth, it was to find evidence that non-Africans built Great Zimbabwe. He failed. Every artifact, every construction technique, every cultural marker pointed to African origin. But Bent published his findings anyway, claiming Arab construction despite his own evidence. This wasn't bad archaeology. This was propaganda disguised as science. For 70 years, the Rhodesian government made it illegal to suggest that Africans built Great Zimbabwe. Not just unpopular. Illegal. Archaeologists lost funding. Students were expelled from universities. The truth was criminalized because the truth was dangerous to the colonial project. But the most sophisticated erasure happened to the University of Sankore in Timbuktu. When medieval Europe was burning books, Timbuktu had the largest library in the world. 700,000 manuscripts. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, knowledge that wouldn't reach Europe for centuries. The University of Sankore had 25,000 students when Oxford had barely been founded. How did Western historians handle this inconvenient truth? They called Timbuktu a myth. For 300 years, they insisted it was African fantasy. Even when European explorers finally reached Timbuktu in the 1800s and found the manuscripts, Western academia dismissed them as copies of Arab works. They couldn't accept that black scholars were advancing human knowledge while Europe was in its dark ages. The evidence was always there. Medieval Arab historians like Al-Umari documented Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. He gave away so much gold in Cairo that the metal's value crashed for 10 years. 10 years. The richest man in medieval history was African, but your textbooks taught you about European kings who couldn't afford shoes. This wasn't accidental ignorance. This was systematic theft. They didn't just steal gold and people from Africa. They stole history. They stole the proof of African genius because that proof made slavery and colonization impossible to justify. The method was always the same: question African achievements, accept European claims without evidence, and when the truth became undeniable, minimize it. Call it lucky. Call it isolated. Never acknowledge the pattern of African brilliance that spans millennia. Today, they are still using these methods. When African astronomers at Dogon possessed detailed knowledge of stars invisible to the naked eye, Western academics spent decades trying to prove they learned it from Europeans. When that failed, they claimed coincidence. Anything except African sophistication. But you know better now. You've seen their playbook. You understand that every time they said, primitive Africa, they were describing the Europe that learned medicine from African universities. Every time they said, dark continent, they were projecting their own dark ages onto the continent that preserved human knowledge. Your ancestors built civilizations that made Rome look small. Your ancestors governed federations when Europeans worshipped trees. Your ancestors calculated star movements when Europeans thought the earth was flat. This isn't pride talking. This is evidence talking. The truth was always there, waiting for you to reclaim it. Follow Ponolens as we continue exposing what they tried to bury.